21 Jesus healeth a demoniac, and the swine are cast into the sea. Afterwards he healeth the daughter of the Canaanites. Jesus went up to Capernaum, and as he drew near to the city, behold, there came out of the tombs one that was possessed of a devil, and in such wise that no chain could hold him, and he did great harm to the man. The demons cried out through his mouth, saying, O Holy One of God, why art thou come before the time to trouble us? And they prayed him that he would not cast them forth. Jesus asked them how many they were. They answered 6,666. When the disciples heard this, they were affrighted, and prayed Jesus that he would depart. Then said Jesus, Where is your faith? It is necessary that the demon should depart, and not I. The demons therefore cried, We will come out, but permit us to enter into those swine. There were feeding there near to the sea, about 10,000 swine belonging to the Canaanites. Thereupon Jesus said, Depart, and enter into the swine. With a roar the demons entered into the swine, and cast them headlong into the sea. Then fled into the city they that fed the swine, and recounted all that had been brought to pass by Jesus. Accordingly the men of the city came forth and found Jesus and the man that was healed. The men were filled with fear and prayed Jesus that he would depart out of their borders. Jesus accordingly departed from them and went up into the parts of Tyre and Sidon. And lo, a woman of Canaan with her 2 sons, who had come forth out of her own country to find Jesus. Having therefore seen him come with his disciples, she cried out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on my daughter, who is tormented of the devil. Jesus did not answer even a single word, because they were of the uncircumcised people. The disciples were moved to pity, and said, O Master, have pity on them. Behold how much they cry out and weep. Jesus answered, I am not sent but unto the people of Israel. Then the woman, with her sons, went before Jesus, weeping and saying, O Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus answered, It is not good to take the bread from the children's hands and give it to the dogs. And this said Jesus by reason of their uncleanness, because they were of the uncircumcised people. The woman answered, O Lord, the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then was Jesus seized with admiration at the words of the woman, and said, O woman, great is thy faith. And having raised his hands to heaven he prayed to God, and then he said, O woman, thy daughter is freed, go thy way in peace. The woman departed, and returning to her home found her daughter, who was blessing God. Wherefore the woman said, Verily there is none other God than the God of Israel. Whereupon all her kinsfolk joined themselves unto the law of God, according to the law written in the book of Moses. 22 Miserable condition of the uncircumcised, in that a dog is better than they. The disciples questioned Jesus on that day, saying, O Master, why didst thou make such answer to the woman, saying that they were dogs? Jesus answered, Verily I say unto you that a dog is better than an uncircumcised man. Then were the disciples sorrowful, saying, Hard are these words, and who shall be able to receive them? Jesus answered, If ye consider, O foolish ones, what the dog doth, that hath no reason, for the service of his master, ye will find my saying to be true. Tell me, doth the dog guard the house of his master, and expose his life against the robber? Yea, assuredly. But what receiveth he? Many blows and injuries with little bread, and he always showeth to his master a joyful countenance. Is this true? True it is, O Master, answered the disciples. Then said Jesus, Consider now how much God hath given to man, and ye shall see how unrighteous he is in not observing the covenant of God made with Abraham his servant. Remember that which David said to Saul king of Israel, against Goliath the Philistine, My Lord, said David, while thy servant was keeping thy servant's flock there came the wolf, the bear, and the lion and seized thy servant's sheep, whereupon thy servant went and slew them, rescuing the sheep. And what is this uncircumcised one but like unto them? Therefore will thy servant go in the name of the Lord God of Israel, and will slay this unclean one that blasphemeth the holy people of God. Then said the disciples, Tell us, O Master, for what reason man must needs be circumcised? Jesus answered, Let it suffice you that God hath commanded it to Abraham, saying, Abraham, circumcise thy foreskin and that of all thy house, for this is a covenant between me and thee forever. 23 Origin of circumcision, and covenant of God with Abraham, and damnation of the uncircumcised. And having said this, Jesus sat nigh unto the mountain which they looked upon. And his disciples came to his side to listen to his words. Then said Jesus, Adam the first man having eaten, by fraud of Satan, the food forbidden of God in paradise, his flesh rebelled against the Spirit, whereupon he swore, saying, By God, I will cut thee. And having broken a piece of rock, he seized his flesh to cut it with the sharp edge of the stone, whereupon he was rebuked by the angel Gabriel. And he answered, I have sworn by God to cut it, I will never be a liar. Then the angel showed him the superfluity of his flesh, and that he cut off. And hence, just as every man taketh flesh for the flesh of Adam, so is he bound to observe in his sons, and from generation to generation came down the obligation of circumcision. But in the time of Abraham there were but few circumcised upon the earth, because that idolatry was multiplied upon the earth. Whereupon God told to Abraham the fact concerning circumcision, and made this covenant, saying, The soul that shall not have his flesh circumcised, I will scatter him from among my people forever. The disciples trembled with fear at these words of Jesus, for with vehemence of spirit he spake. Then said Jesus, Leave fear to him that hath not circumcised his foreskin, for he is deprived of paradise. And having said this, Jesus spake again, saying, The spirit in many is ready in the service of God, but the flesh is weak. The man therefore that feareth God ought to consider what the flesh is, and where it had its origin, and whereto it shall be reduced. Of the clay of the earth created God flesh, and into it he breathed the breath of life, with an inbreathing therein. And therefore when the flesh shall hinder the service of God it ought to be spurned like clay and trampled on, forasmuch as he that hateth his soul in this world shall keep it in life eternal. What the flesh is at this present its desires make manifest that it is a harsh enemy of all good, for it alone desireth sin. Ought then man for the sake of satisfying one of his enemies to leave off pleasing God, his Creator? Consider ye this, all the saints and prophets have been enemies of their flesh for service of God, wherefore readily and with gladness they went to their death, so as not to offend against the law of God given by Moses his servant, and I go and serve the false and lying gods. Remember Elijah, who fled through desert places of the mountains, eating only grass, clad in goat's skin. Ah, how many days he supped not! Ah, how much cold he endured! Ah, how many showers drenched him, and that for the space of 7 years, wherein endured that fierce persecution of the unclean Jezebel. Remember Elisha, who ate barley bread, and wore the coarsest raiment. Verily I say unto you that they, not fearing to spurn the flesh, were feared with great terror by the king and princes. This should suffice for the spurning of the flesh, O men. But if ye will gaze at the sepulchres, ye shall know what flesh is. 24 Notable example how one ought to flee from banqueting and feasting. Having said this, Jesus wept, saying, Woe to those who are servants to their flesh, for they are sure not to have any good in the other life, but only torments for their sins. I tell you that there was a rich glutton who paid no heed to aught but gluttony, and so every day held a splendid feast. There stood at his gate a poor man by name Lazarus, who was full of wounds, and was fain to have those crumbs that fell from the glutton's table. But no one gave them to him, nay, all mocked him. Only the dogs had pity on him, for they licked his wounds. It came to pass that the poor man died, and the angels carried him to the arms of Abraham our father. The rich man also died, and the devils carried him to the arms of Satan, whereupon, undergoing the greatest torment, he lifted up his eyes and from afar saw Lazarus in the arms of Abraham. Then cried the rich man, O Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, who upon his fingers may bring me a drop of water to cool my tongue, which is tormented in this flame. Abraham answered, Son, remember that thou receivedst thy good in the other life and Lazarus his evil, wherefore now thou shalt be in torment, and Lazarus in consolation. The rich man cried out again, saying, O Father Abraham, in my house there are 3 brethren of mine. Therefore send Lazarus to announce to them how much I am suffering, in order that they may repent and not come hither. Abraham answered, They have Moses and the prophets, let I them hear them. The rich man answered, Nay, Father Abraham, but if one dead shall arise they will believe. Abraham answered, Whoso believeth not Moses and the prophets will not believe even the dead if they should arise. See then whether the poor are blessed, said Jesus, who have patience, and only desire that which is necessary, hating the flesh. O wretched they, who bear others to the burial, to give their flesh for food of worms, and do not learn the truth. So far from it that they live here like immortals, for they build great houses and purchase great revenues and live in pride. 25 How one ought to despise the flesh, and how one ought to live in the world. Then said he who writeth, O Master, true are thy words and therefore have we forsaken all to follow thee. Tell us then, how we ought to hate our flesh, for to kill oneself is not lawful, and living we needs must give it its livelihood. Jesus answered, Keep thy flesh like a horse, and thou shalt live securely. For unto a horse food is given by measure and labor without measure, and the bridle is put on him that he may walk at thy will, he is tied up that he may not annoy anyone, he is kept in a poor place, and beaten when he is not obedient, so do thou, then, O Barnabas, and thou shalt live always with God. And be not offended at my words, for David the prophet did the same thing, as he confesseth, saying, I am as an horse before thee, and am always by thee. Now tell me, whether is poorer he who is content with little, or he who desireth much? Verily I say unto you, that if the world had but a sound mind no one would amass anything for himself, but all would be in common. But in this is known its madness, that the more it amasseth the more it desireth. And as much as it amasseth, for the fleshly repose of others doth it amass the same. Therefore let one single robe suffice for you, cast away your purse, carry no wallet, no sandals on your feet, and do not think, saying, What shall happen to us? But have thought to do the will of God, and he will provide for your need, insomuch that nothing shall be lacking unto you. Verily I say unto you, that the amassing much in this life giveth sure witness of not having anything to receive in the other. For he that hath Jerusalem for his native country buildeth not houses in Samaria, for that there is enmity between these cities. Understand yet? Yet, answered the disciples. 26 How one ought to love God. And in this chapter is contained the wonderful contention of Abraham with his father. Then said Jesus, There was a man on a journey who, as he was walking, discovered a treasure in a field that was to be sold for 5 pieces of money. Straightway the man, when he knew this, sold his cloak to buy that field. Is that credible? The disciples answered, He who would not believe this is mad. Thereupon Jesus said, Ye will be mad if ye give not your senses to God to buy your soul, wherein resideth the treasure of love, for love is a treasure incomparable. For he that loveth God hath God for his own, and whoso hath God hath everything. Peter answered, O Master, how ought one to love God with true love? Tell thou us. Jesus replied, Verily I say unto you that he who shall not hate his father and his mother, and his own life, and children, and wife for love of God, that such an one is not worthy to be loved of God. Peter answered, O Master, it is written in the law of God in the book of Moses, Honor thy father, that thou mayest live long upon the earth. And further he saith, Cursed be the son that obeyeth not his father and his mother, wherefore God commanded that such a disobedient son should be by the wrath of the people stoned before the gate of the city. And now how biddest thou us to hate father and mother? Jesus replied, Every word of mine is true, because it is not mine, but God's, who hath sent me to the house of Israel. Therefore I say unto you that all that which ye possess God hath bestowed it upon you, and so, whether is the more precious, the gift or the giver? When thy father and thy mother, with every other thing is a stumbling block to thee in the service of God, abandon them as enemies. Did not God say to Abraham, Go forth from the house of thy father and of thy kindred, and come to dwell in the land which I will give to thee and to thy seed? And wherefore did God say this, save because the father of Abraham was an image maker, who made and worshipped false gods? Whence there was enmity between them insomuch that the father wished to burn his son. Peter answered, True are thy words, wherefore I pray thee tell us how Abraham mocked his father. Jesus replied, Abraham was 7 years old when he began to seek God. So one day he said to his father, Father, what made man? The foolish father answered, Man, for I made thee, and my father made me. Abraham answered, Father, it is not so, for I have heard an old man weeping and saying, O my God, wherefore hast thou not given me children? His father replied, It is true, my son, that God helpeth man to make man, but he putteth not his hand thereto. It is only necessary that man come to pray to his God and to give him lambs and sheep, and his God will help him. Abraham answered, How many gods are there, Father? The old man replied, They are infinite in number, my son. Then said Abraham, O Father, what shall I do if I shall serve one God and another shall wish me evil because I serve him not? In any wise there will come discord between them, and so war will arise among the gods. But if perchance the God that willeth me evil shall slay my own God, what shall I do? It is certain that he will slay me also. The old man, laughing, answered, O son, have no fear, for no God maketh war upon another God. Nay, in the great temple there are 1,000 gods with the great God Baal, and I am now nigh 70 years old, and yet never have I seen that one God hath smitten another God. And assuredly all men do not serve one God, but one man one, and another another. Abraham answered, So, then, they have peace among themselves. Said his father, They have. Then said Abraham, O father, what be the gods like? The old man answered, Fool, every day I make a god, which I sell to others to buy bread, and thou knowest not what the gods are like. And then at that moment he was making an idol. This, said he, is of palm wood, that one is of olive, that little one is of ivory, see how fine it is. Does it not seem as though it were alive? Assuredly, it lacks but breath. Abraham answered, And so, Father, the gods are without breath? Then how do they give breath? And being without life, how give they life? It is certain, Father, that these are not God. The old man was wroth at these words, saying, If thou wert of age to understand, I would break thy head with this axe, but hold thy peace, because thou hast not understanding. Abraham answered, Father, if the gods help to make man, how can it be that man should make the gods? And if the gods are made of wood, it is a great sin to burn wood. But tell me, Father, how is it that, when thou hast made so many gods, the gods have not helped thee to make so many other children that thou shouldest become the most powerful man in the world? The father was beside himself, hearing his son speak so. The son went on, Father, was the world for some time without men? Yes, answered the old man, and why? Because, said Abraham, I should like to know who made the first God. Now go out of my house. Said the old man, and leave me to make this God quickly, and speak no words to me, for, when thou art hungry thou desirest bread and not words. Said Abraham, A fine God, truly, that thou cuttest him as thou wilt, and he defendeth not himself. Then the old man was angry, and said, All the world saith that it is a God, and thou, mad fellow, sayest that it is not. By my gods, if thou wert a man I could kill thee. And having said this, he gave blows and kicks to Abraham, and chased him from the house. 27 In this chapter is clearly seen how improper is laughter in men, also the prudence of Abraham. The disciples laughed over the madness of the old man, and stood amazed at the prudence of Abraham. But Jesus reproved them, saying, Ye have forgotten the words of the prophet, who saith, Present laughter is a herald of weeping to come, and further, Thou shalt not go where is laughter, but sit where they weep, because this life passeth in miseries. Then said Jesus, In the time of Moses, know ye not that for laughing and mocking at others God turned into hideous beasts many men of Egypt? Beware that in any wise ye laugh not at anyone, for ye shall surely weep for it. The disciples answered, We laughed over the madness of the old man. Then said Jesus, Verily I say unto you, every like loveth his like, and therein findeth pleasure. Therefore, if ye were not mad ye would not laugh at madness. They answered, May God have mercy on us. Said Jesus, So be it. Then said Philip, O Master, how came it to pass that Abraham's father wished to burn his son? Jesus answered, One day, Abraham having come to the age of 12 years, his father said to him, Tomorrow is the festival of all the gods, therefore we shall go to the great temple and bear a present to my God, great Baal. And thou shalt choose for thyself a god, for thou art of age to have a god. Abraham answered with guile, Willingly, O my father. And so betimes in the morning they went before every one else to the temple. But Abraham bare beneath his tunic an axe hidden. Whereupon, having entered into the temple, as the crowd increased Abraham hid himself behind an idol in a dark part of the temple. His father, when he departed, believed that Abraham had gone home before him, wherefore he did not stay to seek him. 28. When every one had departed from the temple, the priests closed the temple and went away. Then Abraham took the axe and cut off the feet of all the idols, except the great god Baal. At its feet he placed the axe, amid the ruins which the statues made, for they, through being old and composed of pieces, fell in pieces. Thereupon, Abraham, going forth from the temple, was seen by certain men, who suspected him of having gone to thieve something from the temple. So they laid hold on him, and having arrived at the temple, when they saw their God so broken in pieces, they cried out with lamentation, Come quickly, O men, and let us slay him who hath slain our gods. There ran together there about 10,000 men, with the priests, and questioned Abraham of the reason why he had destroyed their gods. Abraham answered, Ye are foolish. Shall then a man slay God? It is the great God that hath slain them. See you not that axe which he hath near his feet? Certain it is that he desireth no fellows. Then arrived there the father of Abraham, who, mindful of the many discourses of Abraham against their gods, and recognizing the axe wherewith Abraham had broken in pieces the idols, cried out, It hath been this traitor of a son of mine, who hath slain our gods. For this axe is mine. And he recounted to them all that had passed between him and his son. Accordingly the man collected a great quantity of wood, and having bound Abraham's hands and feet put him upon the wood, and put fire underneath. Lo! God, through his angel, commanded the fire that it should not burn Abraham his servant. The fire blazed up with great fury, and burned about 2,000 men of those who had condemned Abraham to death. Abraham verily found himself free, being carried by the angel of God near to the house of his father, without seeing who carried him, and thus Abraham escaped death. 29. Then said Philip, Great is the mercy of God upon whoso loveth him. Tell us, O Master, how Abraham came to the knowledge of God. Jesus answered, Having arrived nigh unto the house of his father, Abraham feared to go into the house, so he removed some distance from the house and sat under a palm tree, where thus abiding by himself he said, It needs must be that there is a God who hath life and power more than man, since he maketh man, and man without God could not make man. Thereupon, looking round upon the stars, the moon, and the sun, he thought that they had been God. But after considering their variableness with their movements, he said, It needs must be that God move not, and that clouds hide him not, otherwise men would be brought to naught. Whereupon, remaining thus in suspense, he heard himself called by name, Abraham. And so, Turning round and not seeing anyone on any side, he said, I have surely heard myself called by name, Abraham. Thereupon, 2 other times in like manner, he heard himself called by name, Abraham. He answered, Who calleth me? Then he heard it said, I am the angel of God, Gabriel. Therefore was Abraham filled with fear, but the angel comforted him, saying, Fear not, Abraham, for that thou art friend of God, wherefore, when thou didst break in pieces the gods of men, thou wert chosen of the God of the angels and prophets, insomuch that thou art written in the book of life. Then said Abraham, What ought I to do, to serve the God of the angels and holy prophets? The angel answered, Go to that fount and wash thee, for God willeth to speak with thee. Abraham answered, Now, how ought I to wash me? Then the angel presented himself unto him as a beautiful youth, and washed himself in the fount, saying, Do thou in turn likewise to thyself, O Abraham. When Abraham had washed himself, the angel said, Go up that mountain, for God willeth to speak to thee there. He ascended the mountain as the angel said to Abraham, and having sat down upon his knees he said to himself, When will the God of the angels speak to me? He heard himself called with a gentle voice, Abraham. Abraham answered him, Who calleth me? The voice answered, I am thy God, O Abraham. Abraham, filled with fear, bent his face to earth, saying, How shall thy servant hearken unto thee, who is dust and ashes? Then said God, Fear not, but rise up, for I have chosen thee for my servant, and I will to bless thee and make thee increase into a great people. Therefore go thou forth from the house of thy father and of thy kindred, and come to dwell in the land which I will give to thee and to thy seed. Abraham answered, All will I do, Lord, but guard me that none other God may do me hurt. Then spake God, saying, I am God alone, and there is none other God but me. I strike down, and make whole, I slay, and give life, I lead down to hell, and I bring out thereof, and none is able to deliver himself out of my hands. Then God gave him the covenant of circumcision, and so our father Abraham knew God. And having said this, Jesus lifted up his hands, saying, To thee be honor and glory, O God. So be it. 30. Jesus went to Jerusalem, near unto the Synophagia, equals Tabernacles, a feast of our nation. The scribes and Pharisees having perceived this, took counsel to catch him in his talk. Whereupon, there came to him a doctor, saying, Master, what must I do to have eternal life? Jesus answered, How is it written in the law? The tempter answered, saying, Love the Lord thy God, and thy neighbor. Thou shalt love thy God above all things, with all thy heart and thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. Jesus answered, Thou hast answered well, therefore go and do thou so, I say, and thou shalt have eternal life. He said unto him, And who is my neighbor? Jesus answered, lifting up his eyes, A man was going down from Jerusalem to go unto Jericho, a city rebuilt under a curse. This man on the road was seized by robbers, wounded and stripped, whereupon they departed, leaving him half dead. It chanced that a priest passed by that place, and he, seeing the wounded man, passed on without greeting him. In like manner passed a Levite, without saying a word. It chanced that there passed also a Samaritan, who, seeing the wounded man, was moved to compassion, and alighted from his horse, and took the wounded man and washed his wounds with wine, and anointed them with ointment, and binding up his wounds for him and comforting him, he set him upon his own horse. Whereupon, having arrived in the evening at the inn, he gave him into the charge of the host. And when he had risen on the morrow, he said, Take care of this man, and I will pay thee all. And having presented 4 gold pieces to the sick man for the host, he said, Be of good cheer, for I will speedily return and conduct thee to my own home. Tell me, said Jesus, which of these was the neighbor? The doctor answered, He who showed mercy. Then said Jesus, Thou hast answered rightly, therefore go and do thou likewise. The doctor departed in confusion.